So the Industrial Revolution, how is it a principal force in shaping our modern world? Right? There's primarily three things, and we'll talk about each of them individually as we work our way through the key terms. Okay? So Europe in the mid-18th century. What was Europe like in the mid-18th century? What did most people do for jobs in the mid-18th century? Allison?
Agriculture was the dominant economic activity, and peasants were the most numerous class.
Okay, so most people are farmers, which means that most people are peasants, right? Peasants are farmers. It's a simple equation at this point in time. So if that's true, right, that's going to change. It's the only reason that we would have it in there, because that changes. And why that change matters is because it's going to change the entire hierarchy of society as a whole. Right? So we'll get into that first significant impact when we get to industrialization and talent. But that's really the big impact of the first shift, is you're shifting away from everybody's a farmer. That's how it used to be in the Middle Ages. Everybody was a farmer. Not literally, but a vast majority. Right? If you think of France, right? 98% of France is in the third estate. 90% of the third estate are peasants. Which means that 90% of your 98% are peasants. And France is the biggest country in Europe at this time. There's 26 million people in their country before the French Revolution starts. That's a lot of farmers. Okay? Now all of a sudden, they don't. Why? Well, let's kind of think about that, right? They start making machines. The machines can do the work faster. Why would you need farmers? A lot of things change as a result of that. So, numero uno, right? We have this old rural regime. If you think of like the old regime, it's very rural in nature and very rural in the economy, the economic activity. That's going to shift into a more industrial style. Now, the outcome of that shift, right? You could draw a line directly from Europe down to industrialization and talent, because that's kind of the difference. Right? We believe we talked about this last time too, but we go from royals, nobles, and clergy and all that stuff, and then you have the third estate. Right, and I'm using third estate. They didn't call it the third estate anywhere but France, but at the same time, what is that hierarchy based on? Birthright, where you're born, right? So it's based on your birth. Okay, that shifts into what type of hierarchy? What's it based on in the modern era? Wealth. So instead of that, we have the really, really rich people on top. We have the pretty rich people in the middle, and we have the not so rich people on the bottom. Again, it's a system based on wealth. Okay. Now, what is not present here? Well, let's think about this. If you're born into the third estate, what is the percentage chance, or what is the chance at all, that you're ever going to become a noble? Not going to happen in this lifetime. What's the chance that if you're a noble, you're going to become the king? I guess you could argue it's slim, because if you kill the king, then you become the king, and that's how politics works in the Middle Ages. Is the biggest, strongest, hairiest dude carrying the most armor with a lot of people on his side, all of a sudden he's our leader, right? So there's a slight chance, but probably not going to happen. Okay, so what that's referred to, that inability to move, right? There's no social mobility. That's a big concept, right? So social mobility, right? What does the word mobility move? Oh my God, what does the word mobility mean? What does it mean to be mobile, Mike? To move. To move. Okay, so movement. So what then might social mobility mean? Yeah. Yeah, so it's movement, right? Between social classes. It's movement between levels in your hierarchy. Now, every society ever has had a hierarchy. Communism attempted to destroy a hierarchical system. Everybody's equal. Turns out disastrous. It has disastrous results. It's an atrocious violation of human rights in all aspects and everywhere it's been tried. But social mobility is something that really in old regime Europe, not just old regime France, that's not a thing. For thousands of years, wherever you're born is where you die. There is no motion between the classes. If you're born a peasant, you die a peasant. If you're born a noble, you die a noble. If you're born a royal, barring from some unforeseen circumstance like a revolution or an invasion, you die a royal. Now, all of a sudden, that's not at all true. Think of Bill Gates. Bill Gates started Microsoft in his garage. Jeff Bezos started Amazon in his garage. You ever look at early pictures of Jeff Bezos at Amazon? He's just sitting at a desk with a computer and he's trying to figure out how to run a business. He started here and then worked his way up and is now the richest man on the face of the planet, arguably in all of modern history, right? Other than the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, those are exceptions because in modern day dollars, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies are worth around like 250 to 350 billion dollars. So, you know, Jeff Bezos at like 180 billion dollars, 190 billion dollars is still not at that level. But we don't really need to focus on that. But you can move up, right? And then you can also move down, right? Your life, if you're a businessman, if you're a successful businessman, well, you can go up, but then you can also lose your business, and then you can go back up, and you can come back down, and you go up and down forever, right? It doesn't matter. There's no limits. The only limit is how successful you are. Now, once you're up, you're more likely to stay up, but it doesn't mean that that's a guarantee. 2008, a lot of people that were on the top tier lost a lot of money in the housing market, and all of a sudden, they're down here. They're completely broken, jobless, and they called it the Great Recession that we just came out of. Right? So, I mean, it's a new thing, but it's really transformative in terms of what people are able to do, because all of a sudden now, that person matters, right? There's like potential for that person. What's the potential, right? What's the potential growth for a member of the third estate? Nothing. Like their life is never going to change. Now, we live in a society where your life can change on a dime. You can become wealthy overnight. You can lose it all in an hour, right? Depends on how you make your money, but at the same time, there's a lot of social mobility. Okay? So that's a very important concept. And when we're getting to industrialization and talent, more and more throughout the Industrial Revolution, as we move through the Industrial Revolution, we end up with a society that is based on merit. It's based on talent. It's based on, did you earn it? Are you worthy? Not are you born into it? Okay, let's think about this for a second. The French Revolution tried to do that. The French Revolution's goal was to create a society that was based on individual liberty and individual freedoms, right? Generalized social equality. Did it do that? Did they achieve the society that they were going for? No, not really. Because at the end of the French Revolution, Napoleon does try to do things, but Napoleon loses and they end up going back to the way things were. The goals of the French Revolution, though, to achieve that socially equal society, right? The goals of the French Revolution are actually accomplished by the Industrial Revolution. It's a weird sort of turn of events, but that's why this unit comes after that unit directly, right? One leads directly into the other. The French Revolution kind of gets the theory going, but the Industrial Revolution forever changes society in a way that you can't go back to the way that things were. The French Revolution tries to do that. It's a little out of hand, but it doesn't actually achieve it. It's more like the first attempt at it. The Industrial Revolution, this is a permanent shift. If you think about modern society, and especially in America, that's exactly what we're experiencing. Just to give you a weird summary, okay? This is what this entire point comes down to. You guys ever heard that Drake song? It's like started at the bottom, now we're here. All right, I'm not gonna say any more of the lyrics than that because let's just be honest, nobody wants to hear that. But at the same time, right, that idea, you started at the bottom and now you're here, that's not possible without the Industrial Revolution. Okay, that's the core idea that you need to understand. So when we're talking about social mobility, when we're talking about meritocracy, industrialization, and talent, that's what we're talking about. More and more people are being judged by their talent. And because you're being judged by your talent and not your birthright, there's more social mobility. All right, we think of old regime France. So we're gonna pivot our focus into democracy and democratization. You've got two types of classes, right? You've got the privileged classes and you've got the unprivileged class of everybody who's not in the privileged class. Now, in old regime Europe, not just France, in old regime Europe in general, all political power is concentrated at the top of the social hierarchy. Right? All political power is at the top. Then we get to a point where, because of the French Revolution and the combined efforts of industrialization, who becomes more important? Specifically, who thinking? Lisa, what do you think?
Like, you mean?
Who becomes more important? The who? The third estate, definitely, right? But within even the third estate, the bourgeoisie. The working class, their lot decreases slightly. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the bourgeoisie, the business owners, right? You have a lot more access to industrialization. So I thought you raised your hand. And when we get into this, right, the middle class is growing. They're making a lot of money. They're expanding their resources. They're getting more resources. They're getting more markets they can sell stuff to. So all of a sudden, the people at the top of this, right, they start looking at this like, hey, right, we want some of that power. Now, the bourgeoisie is not a majority of the third estate. It's still a minority of the third estate, but now they want some political power. But wait, if we give them political power as a default, not as an intent, right? Not an intentional goal, but as a default of the bourgeoisie gaining political power, you automatically almost give that power to everyone below you as well. It's almost like trickle-down political power. Because a member of the third estate, because the bourgeoisie are members of the third estate in this old school system of birthright hierarchy, right? Once you give a member of the third estate political power, it's going to be much easier to extend those same rights to lower class members of your society. Give it 150 years, we're going to get complete sharing of political power to where in the modern day, right? Political power is shared by all. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody has the exact same amount of power, because if you have more money, then there's been scientific research proving that you could literally buy elections. Like the more money that you invest in an election, the greater your chance of winning that election. It's not even like a slight correlation. It's like a direct correlation. Part of the reason that Donald Trump won in 2016 is because he got $4 billion in free advertisement, because the guy couldn't shut up and he would say some crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden, they're focusing on him and they're just repeating, and he's getting all of this attention, right? And then he goes from, oh, there's no way in heck that he's going to run, to becoming the most important Republican on the national stage. Why? Because he got attention, because people were paying attention to him. Now, the way that he garnished it was very interesting. It was, you know, the crazier you say, the crazier stuff that you say, then inevitably people will pay attention. But the more that you spend on politics, the more power you have. That is true. But in terms of legal rights, not reality, just legal rights, like legal realities. Who has the right to vote? Well, it used to be that these people didn't have that right at all. So even if the reality in the modern day is that, you know, some corporations dominate politics, all that other stuff, that's true. But legally, political power is now shared by all. It trickles down because the bourgeoisie gain it first, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about democratization. Through a long process, through decades. This doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes a long time to do this. But through a process of about 150 years, eventually every member of society is going to have the same legal political power. You have the right to serve on a jury. You have the right to hold office. You have the right to participate in an election. That's something that was traditionally denied to people. Eventually, that right will be extended to women, right? Another lower class, traditional, right? Traditionally lower class social class, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality. So the fact that the bourgeoisie is going in that direction, well, they're only able to do that because of the Industrial Revolution. And because of what they do, political power slowly kind of spreads down. Right? That's what we're referring to if you're looking at the term democracy/democratization. Right? First, the middle class gets the vote, then the working class gets the vote. And in this way, political power and political rights trickle down to eventually include every member of society. So that is point number 2 in terms of how is it principal force in shaping our modern world. Why? Because almost every country is a democracy. There are very few non-democratic countries left. They still exist, right? I mean, Africa, Middle East, there's still some South, North Korea is a great example. That's definitely not democratic. Their own citizens are hostages in their own nation. It's really sad if you ever look into it, but at the same time, that is true for Western civilization, which is the title of this course. So if you think of what happens to all Western societies, well, we don't have any monarchies left. At least any true monarchies where the king or queen has real political power, right? Where they're demonstrably in charge. That's not true anymore. Think about that for a second. We go from every country has a king or a queen to no countries have a king or a queen. How did you do that in 200 years? Right? It's because of the Industrial Revolution. It's because of this democratization of power. It's because of this spreading out, this trickle-down political rights. Right? The trickle-down political rights is not a real term. Right? They use that to refer to economics, but it makes sense. So you can think of it that way. Just don't use it as an official term. Okay? Does that make sense though? Spread it out. Beautiful. We only have one more. So we've covered 2. The third one, okay, is secularization. So we took a look at the word urbanization. What does urbanization mean? Lisa?
Towards cities.
Process of becoming like a city, right? Urban means city, ization, process of. What then does secularization mean? What does secular mean, Rasheen?
Non-religious.
Non-religious, therefore what is secularization? Beautiful. The process of society becoming non-religious. Right? It's not a very difficult term to understand. But we should understand the connection between industrialization and secularization. Because there's a direct connection. It's not just an accident. I mean, it's kind of an accident. It's not like an intentional thing. So I guess it is an accident, but it's not irrational. There's a direct connection between one and the other. Okay. So if you think about it, like what's happening with people, the Middle East, 16, 17, 1800s, right, at the beginning of the 1800s, everybody's farming. Everybody has really good connections. Everybody's tight with their family. Everybody's tight with their priests. Everybody lives in these small villages and they're really enjoying themselves. And then everybody starts moving into these cities because the factory system starts pulling them in. It starts bringing these workers together. And all of a sudden you've got people that once lived in villages who now live in a completely different type of scenario. They have no idea what's going on. They don't know how to live there. They barely know how to work there. They more than likely left their family in the village. And so now they're there by themselves. They have no idea what's going on. They're not really sure of who is around them. They have no connection with anything around them. And the condition, I mean, think about the unsanitary, horrible living conditions, the disease that was spreading around, the awful work conditions, how hot it was in these factories, working 15 hours a day with the potential to come up with an injury that could kill you. I mean, this is just awful. Their life is awful. When you have all of that going on, why would you be concerned with something that's traditional in terms of your connections to your village? Your religion is part of your identity when you're in the village. When you leave the village, right? When you depart away from your agricultural town, Why would you focus on that anymore? You have all of these other things to worry about. They lose that connection with their religion. So they don't care about Christianity anymore necessarily. That's a lasting impact. Right? Think about this for a second. Like, honestly, think about this. When's the last time that you had a serious conversation, or a conversation in general, about religion that wasn't inside this building and wasn't with your parents? You don't have to answer them. But I would venture a guess that if we took a poll of everybody, we might find a few that have, but the vast majority have not. Agree or disagree? Agree. That's weird. That's a modern thing. Go back 400 years, it's the exact opposite. You're talking about your religion all the time because it's a crucial part of your identity. How many of you know even more than one person that'd be willing to die for their religious beliefs? I'm not actually asking you, but like, think about it. Like somebody, like they walk up to you and they put a gun to your head and they say, I'm gonna blow your brains out unless you denounce Jesus Christ. How many people are gonna take the bullet? That you know. Or insert other religion here, insert Hinduism or Buddhist gods or Muslim, it doesn't matter. Religion is not that important to people in modern society. It's not universal. We can't paint all of society with such a broad stroke. That's a vast overgeneralization to say that religion doesn't matter at all. 95% of the world is still religious and still believes in some sort of organized form of religion. But at the same time, the importance of it to individuals in modern society is drastically less than what it once was. Why? What changed? In the Middle Ages, it's the most important thing. Now it doesn't matter at all. How did that happen? Right? The answer to that question is the Industrial Revolution. This is the reason why. This is how you go from a Middle Ages where you have spirituality is the most important thing, the only thing worth pursuing or thinking about. And then we get to modern day, our modern world, where secularization, I mean, it's very uncommon and unpopular to be a religious person. Now that we could have a whole separate argument on the merits of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. It happened. And that's what we're studying, is change over time. So what caused that change is the Industrial Revolution. Right? So these three concepts, you have the increase in social mobility because you have a different type of hierarchy that's no longer based on birthright. It's based on, you can insert talent. Really, talent means wealth, because in their opinion, if you're talented, you will become wealthy. Doesn't inherently mean that that's true, but that's what they believe, right? So based on talent or wealth, right? The new form of social hierarchy matters a lot because now you have an increase in the amount of social mobility between social classes. What that social mobility leads to is all of a sudden we have a society where rags to riches stories are very common in Western society, right? The second important outcome is democratization, where you have the consolidation of political power, right? You have the monopolization of political power at the top. That ends. Once the bourgeoisie become wealthy, become more powerful, become more prevalent, they fight for their political rights. Because they gain their political rights, eventually over time, not overnight, but over the period of about 150 years, political power is going to be passed down to eventually include all of society. You no longer have an unprivileged class. That is unique to the Middle Ages before the French Revolution. It is destroyed with the Industrial Revolution. There is no such thing as a privileged class, at least in theory. In reality, that's a different argument, but in theory. And last but not least, you have the secularization of society, where non-religious pursuits are far more important than religious pursuits to the average modern individual. Again, this is unique to Western society. You go to Eastern society, it's not the same thing. You go to the Middle East, not the same thing, right? But those are not Western civilizations. Like they have their own cultural values, they have their own points of emphasis, they have their own lineage of development. So this is unique to us, but it all comes from the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so emphasize those in your writing part. I would definitely kind of touch on that and make sure that you address those in depth, okay? Do we have any questions on 6.4? We're gonna skip the last two terms because they're not. Industrialization geography, it happened in the Northwest, it didn't happen in the Southeast. Don't worry about that. I wouldn't even write that down. I would ignore that completely. And then the West and the rest, this is a really, really simple idea. All right, let's just think about this for a second. If we take this as progress and this is time, okay? So we have the West here, and with the Industrial Revolution, they exponentially grow, right? It speeds up a lot. The rest of the world is still advancing. That was awful. It's still advancing, but not as fast. So the gap that once was here, right? There's a much bigger gap. What that's going to lead to is Europe is going to run the world. For better or for worse, Europe is going to dominate the world. That's what we'll see in imperialism. We're going to kind of brush over it because it's really easy to understand. Hey, we have guns, you don't, we win, period, moving on. It's pretty straightforward, right? But why does that happen? Well, it all comes from this. All right, so that's what we refer to with the West and the rest. But we'll really focus on that in future units when we get to imperialism and World War I. So I don't want to spend the rest of the class doing that. Timed out pretty well. We have about 10 minutes left. All right, I want to go back through 6.1 to 6.4, kind of just as a general review. If you guys have any questions at all about anything, 6.1 to 6.4, we can review it. But primarily we want to focus on 0.1 to 0.3. Okay, so 1 to 3. So let's go to 6.1. Okay, we look at the changes in technology. Why does the cotton industry matter? What happens in the cotton industry? What happens in the cotton industry in general? Just summarizing general model.
As the cotton distribution got a lot bigger and faster, which then impacted society
Okay, it got a lot bigger, faster. How?
because they started coming up with new machinery.
Okay, so they came up with new machines, and those machines replaced the people that are doing the work, right? What does that lead to? What's the outcome of that, Bridget?
What's the factory system?
The factory system. Why did they start? Why does machines lead to factories?
More efficient.
Well, the machines are definitely more efficient, but why do people have to move to factories? What's the benefit of that? Why does that need to happen? Okay, it takes less time. That's definitely true. Jimmy?
They don't have jobs.
You what?
They don't have jobs.
They don't have jobs, but why couldn't you just send the way that they normally do, where they send it to where you live? Like, I'll send you wool and then you make it and you bring it back.
Takes too much time.
Okay, it takes too much time. You're absolutely on point, Allison.
More efficient to like work in a big factory with several people instead of working by yourself in your home.
Okay, so it's way more efficient to have people come to the machine than to give the machine to the people. Several reasons. Number one, the machines are freaking massive, right? They're absolutely ginormous machines. Number two, they're really expensive. You don't need to know the specifics of that, but we should generally be familiar with the fact that you can't send an individual machine to every single person's home. Therefore, if you can't send it to them, make them come to it. It's the origin of the factory system. It's that simple. They start bringing workers to it because it makes a lot more sense. They just put multiple levels and they have multiple machines, and then all of a sudden we start churning out all this stuff. Now the steam engine takes the factory system and kind of leads to its explosion in terms of its usefulness. What is the effect of the steam engine? Why does the steam engine matter? Machine?
It can be located anywhere.
Okay, it can be located anywhere. Why does that matter?
It doesn't require running water.
Okay, it doesn't require running water. What's the effect of that? It doesn't require running water, and it can run anywhere that you put it. Good.
It allows factories to be built anywhere.
Okay, you can build factories anywhere. What does that lead to? Yeah, urbanization, which means? Okay, so how does a steam engine lead to urbanization? You're right.
If they can be built anywhere, then people move to the factories.
There you go. If you can build a factory in the middle of nowhere, people will move to the factory. Them moving to the factory is urbanization. All of a sudden, you've got a city out of nowhere. So that starts happening everywhere. These cities start popping up out of nowhere. Last but not least, if we're looking at steel and transportation together, right? Those are only important together. Steel by itself, not important. Railways don't exist without steel, so you need both of them, right? The significance of those, why do they matter? What's the benefit of having steel? And one of the other benefits that we never really talked about, the steam engine. Just think about this for a second, right? You take a steam engine from a factory, Well, now we can put it on wheels. Let's put it on a train. Now we have a steam locomotive. Let's put it on a boat. Now we have a steam ship, a steam ferry, right? It's a new form of energy. Well, that's useful. Why does that matter in terms of its combination with steel? Bridget?
It opens up new markets.
It opens up new markets, which means what for business owners? What happens to business owners, Allison?
They get more money.
They get a lot more money because now you have all these different places that you can trade with. Think of it this way. If you can trade with Chicago, you're going to make a lot of money. If you can trade with all of America, you can make a lot more money than you can trade with Chicago. If you can trade with the entire world, you're going to make exponentially more money than you could if you're just trading with Chicago or just trading with America. So all of a sudden you have an increase in the potential profits for these business owners. Why does that matter? What is the outcome of these profits that go to these business owners? You got a bunch of bourgeoisie people making a lot of money, so what? Why does it matter that they're successful, Bridget?
Build more factories.
Okay, they could open up more factories, Megan.
They gain political power.
They gain political power. Why does it matter that they gain political power? Exactly, because now the rest of society will. It's a very sequential order of events. One thing logically leads to the next, right? It's not planned, it's not intended that way, but that is what happened. Now we move into 6.2. The primary outcomes, what happens to society? Well, we already talked about that, right? We have the birthright being replaced by a hierarchical system of wealth. Okay, the bourgeoisie is what Megan just said. They become more wealthy, they become more politically active, they gain political power, eventually that political power spreads and permeates all of society. Right? What about the working class? The middle class, their life is getting better. What happens to the working class? What's their life like in the Industrial Revolution?
It's really bad, unsanitary.
It's really bad, it's unsanitary, right? It's dirty, it's gross, it's horrible work. Their life sucks in every possible way. Just think of a way that your life could be worse, and that's probably what life was like during the Industrial Revolution. It was absolutely a living hell in the truest definition of the word. Right? I mean, it was so hot that you literally couldn't catch your breath sometimes. There are stories of young boys as young as 7 to 9 years old. There's a story specifically that's standing out in my head that this kid was, he was an adult when he was giving the interview, but he was talking about it and he said that he had to hide in the coal mines and he couldn't eat anything because there was no food. So he lived for 2 years off of eating candles. It's as bad as you think it is, probably worse. Right? So it's absolutely awful for the working class, but their life will get better eventually in the long run. It takes a long time, but that difference, right? If you think of that difference where the middle class is getting really wealthy, the working class is going down, that difference, that new wage gap in earnings, that's going to lead to socialism because they're going to look for a solution to the problem, right? Then we get into the reforms. And why does reform matter in England? What's the significance of reform? I'm a little bit short, so I want to try and summarize all together. Rasheen?
They come up with like new ideas.
You're right, they come up with new ideas. Yep.
Instead of like killing each other. Nicer way.
Yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's an alternate form of enacting social change other than revolution, which is typically very brutal and violent. So now you have another tool in your toolbox of enacting social change. You don't need to have a revolution. You could, it'll work, but you don't need to, right? That's important. Now, eventually they're going to enact a bunch of different reforms. All of those reforms are focused primarily on addressing the issues that are facing the working class. Not too many of them are focused on the middle class because the middle class life is pretty awesome, it really is, it's quite enjoyable. But at the same time, the working class, not so much, right? So they're going to attempt to remedy that situation. How do they attempt it? What's the medium that the working class can use? They have a source of power, right? Lisa?
They have more people, which means more power.
Exactly, they have more people. So they're power in numbers, and if you can organize, which is the function of unions, then all of a sudden you can exert some authority. right? Now, it doesn't work, the unions are largely unsuccessful, but it is a template that still lasts to this day. Unions are very powerful in the modern day. Right, I have a lot of friends who work for unions, they get a lot of money, and there's a lot of exertion of authority on job sites, because it's just the way it works. Is if you understand, if you have any family members who are in a union, that's a good thing, right? It helps out in terms of protecting their own workers. So eventually it will become a successful tool, but initially it's not. All right, if you guys have any direct questions, shoot me an email. All right, I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Other than that, just check Canvas for an announcement on the GIM kit. There will be one posted.
Sorry, what day?
Proletariat is a working class member. So proletariat is like the bourgeoisie in business class, proletariat working class. Have a good spring break, guys.
I was confused, like, what's that, the difference between that and what the
Nothing. Yeah, I mean, well, terminology.
Just another fancy word.
Yeah, proletariat's a Roman term that Karl Marx uses to refer to it. That's the only reason. So the proletariat generally, what it literally translates to is somebody who only owns their offspring. So somebody who's so poor that they have absolutely nothing except for their kids. That's what the word actually means. So if you associate it with working class, when we get to Marxism, it's the conflict between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
Thank you.
Absolutely, have a good one.
You too. Have a spring break.
Yeah, you too.